Before sushi hit Los Angeles and bento boxes showed up in grocery stores, Japanese fishermen in 1930s California were already living that life, long before America ever caught on. Out on the Pacific, before sunrise, they packed rice balls, miso soups, and salted fish into tin boxes. Meals meant to survive the sea, the cold, and the struggle of starting over in a new land. These weren't fancy dishes. They were survival food, born from grit and homesickness. But here's the twist. Those same humble recipes became the blueprint for the Japanese-American food we love today. From Monterey to Terminal Island, these fishermen cooked with whatever they had. Seaweed they gathered, fish they couldn't sell, pickles from home, and a lot of heart. Tonight, we're diving into 25 forgotten foods that fueled their courage, carried their culture, and changed California's coastline forever. Because sometimes, the meals that history forgets are the ones that built it. 1. Grilled, salted, and dried sardines. In the early morning fog of Monterey Bay, Japanese fishermen hung fresh sardines on long bamboo poles, letting the Pacific breeze and salt air do the curing. This wasn't fancy food, it was himono, the taste of survival. By afternoon, the fish were leathery and glistening silver, ready to be grilled over a small charcoal fire on the dock. When the oil began to pop and the air filled with that sharp, smoky scent, the men would gather, bowls of hot rice in hand, pickled daikon on the side. One bite of himono brought the ocean straight to the tongue, salty, rich, and honest. It was the kind of meal that reminded them who they were, fishermen, far from home, but still connected to Japan through the sea and salt. In 1930s California, a plate of himono might cost just a few pennies, but to those men, it was everything: warmth, memory, and strength for another day at sea. 2. Fresh tuna sashimi. Nothing made a fisherman's heart beat faster than landing a glistening bluefin off the California coast. Before tuna became a supermarket staple, it was the pride of Japanese crews who knew how to honor the catch. They didn't waste a thing. The finest cuts were sliced right there on the deck, knife gliding through ruby flesh as waves rocked the boat. Fresh tuna sashimi wasn't luxury, it was gratitude. After hours of hauling nets and fighting cold wind, the first thin slice was shared in silence, dipped in soy sauce mixed with a touch of wasabi brought from home. It was raw, pure, and alive with the taste of the Pacific. Back then, a tuna could feed an entire crew for days, and the best pieces never made it to market. They were eaten at sea, under a rising sun. In those moments, surrounded by nothing but water, that slice of sashimi wasn't just food, it was proof they'd conquered the ocean once again. 3. Simmered fish head and bone broth with miso. When nothing could go to waste, even the fish heads had purpose. After long days on the water, Japanese fishermen in 1930s California gathered whatever was left, bones, collars, heads, and dropped them into a pot with miso, seaweed, and scraps of ginger. As the broth simmered, the steam carried that deep, ocean-rich aroma that could warm even the coldest nights on the coast. They called it Ara-jiru, a fisherman's soup, humble, hearty, and full of soul. The fat from the bones gave it richness, while miso added that earthy depth every sailor craved. Served with rice or a few pickled vegetables, it turned scraps into something sacred. For men who faced storms and uncertainty, this bowl meant more than comfort. It was resilience in liquid form. Every spoonful tasted like home, like the promise that no part of their labor or their journey would ever be wasted. 4. Kamaboko. In the bustling canneries and fishing camps of 1930s California, nothing was ever thrown away. The leftover white fish, cod, pollock, even scraps of halibut, found new life as kamaboko, a smooth, steamed fish paste molded into half-moon loaves. It was practical ingenuity, turning what others discarded into a meal of pride. Wives and mothers would grind the fish by hand, mix it with salt, mirin, and egg whites, then steam it until springy and pale pink. Sliced thin, kamaboko was served with rice, slipped into noodle soups, or grilled for a smoky edge. For the fisherman, it was a taste of home, soft, comforting, and familiar amid the noise of the docks and the clang of boats. Even today, you'll find kamaboko on every Japanese New Year's table. But back then, it was more than tradition. It was survival disguised as delicacy, proof that resourcefulness could turn even fish scraps into something beautiful. 5. Grilled whole mackerel with ginger. When the mackerel boats came in heavy, the docks filled with the sharp, ocean-sweet smell of grilling fish. Saba shioyaki, whole mackerel rubbed with coarse salt and brushed with ginger, was the fisherman's dinner of choice. Cheap, oily, and bursting with flavor, it was a meal that demanded fire, not finesse. Each fish was scored, salted, and laid over the flames until the skin blistered and crisped. The fat sizzled down into the coals, sending up wisps of smoke that mingled with sea air and sweat. Served hot over rice, with a squeeze of lemon or grated daikon, it was bold, salty, and honest, the kind of food that filled you up after 12 hours at sea. Ginger wasn't just flavor, it was medicine. It cut through the fish oil, soothed seasick stomachs, and warmed tired bodies on foggy nights. For a few cents worth of fish and spice, the men ate like kings, tough, hungry kings of the Pacific. 6. Clam and seaweed, miso soup. When the tide went out, Japanese fishermen and their families walked the rocky shores, baskets in hand, searching for treasure, small clams hiding under wet sand. Those humble finds became the heart of one of their most comforting meals, clam and seaweed miso soup. The recipe was simple, but it felt like a gift from the ocean. Fresh clams were scrubbed clean, simmered gently until their shells opened, then combined with wakame seaweed and a scoop of miso paste. The result was a cloudy, fragrant broth that tasted like pure seawater, in the best way possible. Served steaming hot beside bowls of rice, this soup was more than nourishment. It was warmth after the chill of morning fog, a quiet moment of calm after the chaos of hauling nets. Each sip reminded them that even in lean times, the sea always gave something back, a few clams, a handful of seaweed, and a bowl full of gratitude. 7. Mixed vegetable and fish bits rice. After long days gutting fish on the docks, nothing went to waste, not even the small scraps left behind. Those bits, tossed with rice and vegetables, became gomoku gohan, a one-pot fisherman's feast. In cramped kitchens along Monterey's Japanese Quarter, wives stirred together diced carrots, burdock root, shiitake mushrooms, and slivers of leftover fish. A splash of soy sauce, a hint of mirin, and the rice absorbed everything. The salt of the sea, the sweetness of the vegetables, the smoky depth of the fish. When the lid came off the pot, steam carried the scent of both ocean and earth. It was a meal that stretched ingredients and spirits alike. Kids loved finding surprise bites of fish hidden in the grains, and the men swore it tasted better the next day, reheated in bentos out on the water. In a world where nothing came easy, gomoku gohan was proof that resourcefulness could taste like comfort, and survival could smell like home. 8. Tempura of local fish and vegetables. When payday finally came, the fishermen treated themselves to something special. Tempura, crisp golden bites of fish and vegetables dipped in a light batter and fried to perfection. It wasn't an everyday meal, oil was expensive and every drop mattered, but when they cooked it, the whole neighborhood could smell the celebration. They used what the coast gave them, slices of local whitefish, sweet onions, slivers of carrot, even wild herbs foraged near the shore. The batter was whisper-thin, just flour, egg, and cold water, designed to crackle the moment it hit hot oil. Served with soy dipping sauce or sprinkled with sea salt, each piece was a fleeting crunch of joy after weeks of hard labor. For men who spent their days soaked in salt and sweat, tempura was a reminder of festivals back home, of warmth and laughter beyond the waves. A simple meal, but a moment of pride, golden and crisp against the gray of the sea. 9. Stewed octopus in soy and ginger sauce. In the harbors of San Pedro and Monterey, octopus wasn't a delicacy. It was a bonus catch. When the nets came up tangled with tentacles, the Japanese fishermen didn't throw them back. They turned them into taco Himono, tender octopus stewed slowly in soy sauce, ginger, and a touch of sugar until the meat turned soft and glossy. Cooking octopus took patience, and patience was something these men had in abundance. The trick was in the simmer, long enough to tenderize, slow enough to let the broth soak into every piece. The result was savory, sweet, and slightly briny, the taste of the deep ocean tamed by fire and care. Served over a bowl of rice, taco Himono was hearty, humble, and deeply comforting. It reminded them of home festivals in Japan, where octopus balls sizzled on street corners. But here, on the California coast, it became something else. A symbol of adaptation, of turning the unfamiliar into family food. 10. Rice porridge with small fish flakes. When the ocean turned rough and the catches ran thin, the fishermen turned to the simplest comfort of all, okayu, warm rice porridge. Just rice, water, and patience. It was the kind of meal that asked for little but gave everything back. Simmered slowly until soft and creamy, it was soothing on tired stomachs and gentle on cold mornings. To stretch flavor, they'd sprinkle on flakes of dried fish, shavings saved from the week's catch, or a drizzle of soy sauce for salt. Sometimes a few chopped scallions or a pinch of seaweed turned it into something almost luxurious. For the men out at sea, okayu wasn't just breakfast. It was medicine, memory, and comfort in one steaming bowl. After nights of pounding waves and sleepless shifts, it was the first taste of peace. Cheap, simple, endlessly nourishing, okayu was proof that even in the hardest times, warmth didn't come from money. It came from a pot of rice shared with care. 11. Fried canned or fresh abalone. Along the rocky shores of Monterey and Morro Bay, abalone was once so common that fishermen joked it grew faster than seaweed. Japanese divers, skilled and fearless, would pry the giant shells off rocks by hand, bringing up baskets full. When they couldn't sell it all, they cooked it themselves, turning abalone into something unforgettable, the abalone steak. Fresh or canned, the process was the same. Slice it thin, pound it tender, coat it lightly in flour, and fry it in butter or oil until golden at the edges. The aroma was rich and briny, halfway between the ocean and heaven. Some added soy sauce and lemon, others served it over rice with seaweed on the side. It was a rare moment of luxury for hard-working fishermen, crisp on the outside, soft within, a taste of wealth from the sea they toiled on daily. Today, abalone costs a small fortune. But back then, it was the poor man's treasure, proof that sometimes the sea rewarded those who dared to dive deeper. 12. Stir-fried fish strips. In the cramped boarding houses near the docks, quick meals were a necessity. After long days sorting and gutting fish, no one had the strength for slow cooking, so they made stir-fried fish strips, a simple dish that turned leftovers into lightning-fast sustenance. Thin pieces of fish, usually whatever scraps were left from cleaning tuna or mackerel, were tossed into a hot pan with a bit of oil, soy sauce, and minced garlic. Sometimes a few slivers of onion or green pepper joined in, sizzling until everything turned caramel brown. The smell filled the narrow halls, calling in tired men like a dinner bell. Served over a small bowl of rice, it was salty, smoky, and just enough to keep hunger at bay. Each pan told a story of thrift and timing, nothing wasted, nothing fancy, just quick heat and skill. It wasn't a dish for guests, it was a dish for survival. Yet in its simplicity, it carried something pure, the taste of resilience, fried in a single pan. 13. Grilled shellfish. When the boats came in light, the fishermen turned to the shore. The tide pools around Monterey and San Pedro offered a quiet bounty, clams, crabs, and small shellfish clinging to the rocks. With a small fire and a bit of patience, these humble finds became grilled treasures of the sea. Clams were set directly on hot coals until their shells popped open, hissing with salty steam. Crabs were roasted whole, brushed with soy sauce or miso for flavor. There was no silverware, no plates, just fingers, laughter, and the taste of the ocean under the open sky. On those quiet evenings, smoke mixed with sea breeze and the sound of waves replaced conversation. It was food at its simplest and purest, pulled from the earth and eaten moments later. Grilled shellfish wasn't just dinner, it was communion with the sea itself, a reminder that even when fortune turned, the ocean always offered one more meal to those who respected it. 14. Fried whole small fish. Some nights, when the haul was filled with smaller catch, herring, smelt, or anchovies, the fishermen smiled. These little fish, too small to sell, became their own reward. Cleaned, salted, and dusted lightly in flour, they were dropped whole into sizzling oil until golden and crisp. Fried small fish, the working man's feast. The bones turned brittle, the skin blistered and snapped at the first bite. A squeeze of lemon or a splash of soy sauce was all it needed. Eaten with rice and a side of pickles, it was crunchy, salty, and deeply satisfying, the kind of meal that made the long day worth it. Children loved them most, snatching the smallest fish straight off the cooling rack while mothers pretended not to notice. Out at sea, crews fried them right on the boat, the scent of hot oil mixing with salt wind and diesel. It was simple food, yes, but rich in spirit. Proof that joy could come from the smallest catch. 15. Noodle soup in fish stock. When the fog rolled in thick over Monterey Bay, there was nothing more comforting than a steaming bowl of noodle soup made with fish stock. The fishermen didn't have fancy ingredients, just dried noodles, miso or soy, and whatever fish scraps they'd saved from the day's work. But in that small wooden bowl, warmth and strength came together perfectly. They boiled fish bones with kelp and onions, creating a clear, briny broth rich with umami. Into that went the noodles, soft and slippery, followed by bits of fish, a few greens, or sometimes a half-boiled egg if they were lucky. Eaten in silence after long, cold hours on the water, each slurp was a moment of peace. The salt, the steam, the simple flavors, they felt like a hug from home. It wasn't restaurant food, it was survival food made with care. And yet, this humble bowl would one day inspire the noodle shops that define California's coastal towns today. 16. Fish and vegetable stew in soy broth. When the fog clung to the harbor and the boats rocked softly in their slips, the smell of fish and vegetable stew drifted from every kitchen. It was the Japanese fisherman's way of turning hardship into comfort. A single pot simmering with soy, ginger, and the scraps of the day's catch. They called it nizakana, a stew of small fish, daikon radish, carrots, and sometimes tofu. Everything went into one pot, bubbling slowly until the broth turned rich and dark. The soy sauce gave salt and color, the vegetables added sweetness, and the fish brought depth, a perfect harmony born from necessity. After hours in the cold, men gathered around low tables, bowls in hand, steam rising in front of tired faces. It wasn't glamorous, but it filled both belly and spirit. A few fish bones, a splash of soy, a handful of roots. That was all it took to build a meal that tasted like home and endurance in equal measure. 17. Preserved fish flakes, cooked with rice and greens. In the small wooden houses of Japanese fishing families, nothing ever went to waste, not even the tiniest fish flakes. These salty shavings, often made from dried bonito or leftover cooked fish, were tucked away carefully, waiting for the next pot of rice. When times were lean, those bits became the heart of takikomi gohan, seasoned rice cooked with preserved fish and wild greens. The aroma was irresistible. As the rice steamed, soy sauce, seaweed, and fish blended into a savory perfume that filled the whole house. Wives stirred in bits of turnip tops or spinach, giving the dish color and life. It was a one-pot wonder, hearty, wholesome, and deeply Japanese. Out at sea, fishermen packed it cold into bento boxes, knowing every bite carried protein, salt, and a taste of home. It wasn't a rich man's meal. It was a fisherman's memory, preserved in rice. Simple, frugal, and honest, yet powerful enough to remind every man why he worked so hard to return home each night. 18. Rice with fish roe. When luck smiled on the nets and the catch shimmered with roe-filled fish, the fishermen knew they'd earned something special. Rice with fish roe, a meal that turned an ordinary dinner into quiet celebration. They carefully removed the roe sacks, rinsed them in seawater, and simmered them gently in soy sauce, mirin, and a touch of sake until glossy and firm. The flavor was bold, salty, rich, and just a little sweet. Poured over a bowl of hot rice, it glowed like amber jewels against white grains, a reminder that even simple food could feel luxurious. For men who spent days battling wind and tide, that first bite was pure reward, soft, briny, and bursting with the taste of the ocean they lived by. It was shared sparingly, sometimes saved for special mornings or holidays when everyone needed a reminder of why they endured the grind. It wasn't about indulgence, it was about gratitude, for the sea, for survival, and for the small blessings that made the struggle worthwhile. 19. Canned seafood. In the 1930s, long before tinned fish became trendy, Japanese fishermen in California were already relying on it to survive. Canned seafood, usually abalone, tuna, or mackerel, was both their livelihood and their emergency rations. When the weather turned rough or the catch ran low, they'd crack open a can right on the dock and make a meal of it. A splash of soy sauce, a bowl of rice, maybe a few pickled vegetables. That was dinner. Some even fried the canned fish in oil or mixed it into rice porridge to stretch it further. The salty aroma filled the small shacks along Terminal Island, mingling with the hum of conversation and the hiss of the sea. Each can told a story of both innovation and resilience. What began as a way to preserve the ocean's bounty for export became the very thing that sustained the people who harvested it. It wasn't glamour, it was grit, survival sealed in tin and shared with pride. 20. Rice cakes or mochi with dried fish. During cold winter mornings on the California coast, when the fog clung low and the sea was too rough to sail, Japanese fishermen gathered around small stoves for comfort food that tasted like home. Mochi with dried fish. It was a strange pairing to outsiders, but to them it made perfect sense. Mochi, chewy rice cakes pounded smooth, filled the belly, while strips of salty dried fish brought protein and the sharp tang of the ocean. The contrast was perfect. Soft and sticky, meats crisp and smoky. Some grilled the mochi until it puffed and browned, then wrapped it in bits of fish or brushed it with soy sauce. Others dropped both into a bowl of hot tea or broth, letting the flavors melt together. This humble dish carried deep symbolism, strength through simplicity. Each bite reminded them that even when storms kept the boats tied to shore, they still had what mattered most: warmth, resourcefulness, and the company of one another. 21. Rice with small grilled fish. For the Japanese fishermen of California's coast, rice with small grilled fish was the everyday anchor of life. Simple, reliable, and always satisfying. Early each morning, before the boats left the harbor, wives packed bento boxes lined with seaweed and topped with a few tiny fish, perfectly salted and grilled over open coals. These weren't prized catches. They were the ones too small to sell. Sardines, smelt or anchovies, brushed with soy sauce and cooked until crisp. When opened hours later at sea, the rice had soaked up the fish's smoky, salty flavor, creating a meal that felt both practical and deeply personal. Out on the waves, there was no better comfort. Between long casts of the net or in quiet moments watching the fog lift, the men would unwrap their rice, take a bite, and taste home. A handful of fish, a scoop of rice, nothing fancy. But in those moments, it wasn't about plenty. It was about peace. 22. Vegetable and tofu hot pot stew with fish broth. When the nights grew long and the sea winds cut through the shacks, the fishermen gathered around one pot, the nabe, a bubbling stew of vegetables, tofu, and fish broth that turned cold evenings into something close to joy. Everyone contributed what they had: cabbage leaves, daikon radish, scraps of fish, bits of tofu, or a handful of noodles. The broth began clear and light, but grew rich as it simmered, absorbing every flavor and story from the table. Steam fogged the windows while laughter filled the room, the kind of warmth that no fire alone could give. Each man dipped his bowl into the pot, fishing out a piece of tofu or a chunk of fish, grateful for the heat and the company. The nabe wasn't about luxury, it was about togetherness. For people who faced isolation at sea, this shared meal was proof of community, a circle of hands, a pot of hope, and a taste of home reborn in a foreign land. 23. Fried fish cakes with rice. On busy nights, when time was short and hunger was long, Japanese fishermen turned to one of their most beloved staples, fried fish cakes with rice. Made from minced white fish mixed with flour, salt, and a touch of soy, these golden rounds were quick to cook and filling enough to keep a man going through another shift on the docks. They'd fry them in shallow pans, the sizzling oil filling the air with that savory, familiar aroma. Crisp on the outside, soft inside, each bite carried a hint of the ocean and the sweetness of fish caught just hours earlier. Served over steaming rice, maybe with a side of pickled vegetables, it was fast food, 1930s fisherman-style. Kids loved them cold in lunch boxes, and adults ate them hot right off the pan. Cheap, hearty, and deeply satisfying, fish cakes were proof that even scraps could be turned into comfort. A humble meal, yes, but one that never failed to lift weary spirits after another day chasing the sea. 24. Boiled or braised fish with rice. When the ocean was generous, the fishermen saved the best cuts for one of their simplest but most soulful dishes, boiled or braised fish with rice. Known in Japan as nizakana, it was a meal built on patience, not extravagance. They'd place whole fillets of mackerel, rockfish, or cod into a pot with soy sauce, sake, sugar, and sliced ginger. The fish simmered gently until the sauce thickened and glazed the flesh in a deep, savory shine. The smell filled every corner of their tiny wooden homes, salty, sweet, and rich with comfort. Served over plain rice, the tender fish nearly fell apart at the touch of chopsticks. Some poured the leftover sauce over their rice, turning it into a second course of flavor and memory. It was food born from rhythm, catch, cook, share, repeat. A dish that reminded every fisherman that the sea provided not only work, but grace. 25. Seasonal fruit or preserved dessert. After long days at sea and simple, salty meals, sweetness was a rare treasure. For Japanese fishermen in the 1930s California, dessert didn't come from bakeries. It came from nature, in the form of seasonal fruit or homemade preserves. In summer, there were slices of sun-warmed peaches, plums, or berries gathered from nearby orchards. In winter, wives boiled fruit down with sugar to make jams or syrups, sealing them in jars to last through the cold months. Sometimes those preserves were spooned over rice or mochi. Other times, just a single piece of fruit ended the meal. After the taste of the sea, miso, soy, salt, and smoke, that burst of sweetness felt almost heavenly. It was a reminder that even in hard times, life still offered small joys. Those simple desserts weren't about indulgence. They were about balance, a soft sweetness to close the day, to remind every tired fisherman that tomorrow would bring another dawn, another catch, another chance. These 25 dishes weren't born from luxury. They were born from labor, patience, and love. On California's foggy shores in the 1930s, Japanese fishermen turned the simplest ingredients into living memories. Every bowl of rice, every grilled fish, every spoon of miso soup carried a story of adaptation, of men and women rebuilding home across an ocean. They worked brutal hours, facing storms and prejudice, but still found warmth in food. These meals, dried sardines, simmered stews, hot pots, and rice balls, became their language of survival. Together, they didn't just feed their bodies, they shaped California's food culture itself. The soy, the seaweed, the delicate respect for ingredients, it all started here, in the tiny shacks of Monterey and Terminal Island, long before Japanese cuisine became part of American life. What we call tradition today was once improvisation. What we call flavor was once perseverance, and what they cooked was history.